Hi, and welcome to Helping People Perform, the podcast that gives you fascinating insights into those people whose chosen vocation is to help others perform at their best. From consultants to teachers, sports coaches to financial advisors, all of my guests share a passion for getting the most out of individuals, teams, and organisations. Enjoy the episode. Well, welcome to another episode of the Helping People Perform podcast. I'm your host, Paul Teasdale, and today I have with me a friend and a former colleague and a great guy in Steve Hill, who is the commercial director of Auticon, and we'll hear a bit more about that going forward, but also a children's author with his character Jenny Menny, who is a very interesting piece that we're going to delve into a little bit today. So first of all, welcome, Steve.
Thanks, Paul. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for saying that you're going to come on the show. So it's brilliant to have you. What I'd like to do just before we get kicked off in terms of learning about what you're doing now and what's going on in your world in terms of helping people perform, what's your background? What's got you here in the first place?
So off-piste is probably the kind of headline. So I started my own business quite young, carried that on for sort of 12, 13 years, and much to my wife's disappointment at the time, kind of took a look forward and thought, if I'm doing the same thing in 10 years, is that going to provide the same sort of level of stimulation and excitement? And the short answer was no, because I'd sort of done what I wanted to do. I basically created it from a spare bedroom, and we kind of grew to having an office in obviously the UK, but also in Singapore. Had some lovely clients, had our own building. We were very self-contained. We were an agency. So the next level up was actually to get into that kind of that slightly vulnerable middle ground, and to increase, I guess, the level of exposure potentially. And I didn't really want to do that. I'd never sort of put my house up and things like that. So long story short, managed to sort of pass the business into the hands of my co-directors over a period of time. Didn't intend to kind of go into the corporate world. Was going to take a bit of time out, which I did, but not as much as I'd like, to really figure out what I was going to do, what the next kind of opportunity, what the next project, or even the next business was going to be. But I did a lot of work in my business for big tier one techs and banks and financial services, one of which was sort of IBM, and ended up joining IBM and sort of went into what was at the time a really cool part of IBM, which had some of the real emerging technology, such as cyber, mobile, and some of the historical data services and things like that. But went into to look after two of the top 21 accounts at the time, and loved it. It was a very big contrast, obviously being a 100-plus-year-old tech company to my own, but in some ways, and actually all big companies, you're still part of a small team.
Yeah. And
so you've got different reporting lines, but effectively it was great. After that, spent some time at Samsung, and then as we both know, I spent nearly a 4-year period at McLaren before joining Auticon about 18 months ago. So again, potted history, and in between time, discovered that writing books for kids was not only the hardest thing I'd ever done, but was actually a good way originally of trying to help my son when he was first diagnosed with dyslexia. So that's my kind of potted and off-piste history.
Fantastic. And yeah, as you say, we first met in our days at McLaren Applied Technologies. So just remind us, what is it you did when you were at McLaren?
So fundamentally, it was trying to take some of the capabilities, the know-how, some of the actual products and software tools, effectively, that for the most part were created to either support or part of the kind of Formula One journey, and really take that understanding and apply that to other sectors. And in my case, it was the transport sector. So really looking at looking at fleets of assets and understanding how to baseline the performance and optimize performance from a position of data collection, offboarding, augmentation, simulation modeling in order to predict a different outcome. So amazing people, amazing technology. Love the transport sector. There's obviously a wealth of opportunities to be had there. But when the opportunity with Auticon came up, as cool as McLaren was, it was a bit of a no-brainer purely because of my personal connection and my son and autism. Although my son isn't autistic, he's dyslexic, which forms part of the kind of neurodiversity definition, if you like.
Right.
And so Richard Branson, I followed avidly, and so Auticon was always on the sidelines and sort of hit my radar when Richard Branson, Virgin Group, invested in Auticon, and when the opportunity came up to join, it was that personal connection which really made it a bit of a no-brainer for me.
Yeah, fantastic, and it's always great to have that personal connection with the organisations that you work for, and I can think of no sort of more noble cause than the work that Auticon is doing. So, tell us a bit more about Auticon. What is it, and what services are provided?
So, Auticon is first and foremost, it's a social enterprise, so it's not a charity. And I guess the great thing about that, rather than a typical business, is that everything that we do is very much driven by our social mission, which I guess really falls into two parts. So the first part is very much geared to providing long-term career opportunities for autistic adults. The numbers, and this isn't just a UK stat, it's fairly static across the kind of Western world, really, but only about 22% of autistic adults are in full-time employment. And within that 22%, that also includes people that are underemployed, i.e. they're in roles that don't actually correlate to their experience or their training or their aspirations. And so that's a big untapped pool of talent. And so when we started and when we were formed just over 10 years ago, we were really born out of a parent's concern and anxiety over the future of their child's employment prospects. So we literally started out of a basement with our founder and his son becoming an IT consulting business. So very much a traditional IT consulting firm. So now we employ in total just about 350. It's changing all the time. 350 people, of which maybe 275 are diagnosed autistic adults as IT consultants. So we work with major organizations to help augment their technology and IT projects, mainly in the areas of data science, data engineering, data analysis. Also cybersecurity is a good one for us, and also software engineering and QA. And I guess the reason why we've sort of stayed in that particular lane is because along with autism, quite often comes above average cognitive abilities.
Right.
So coming back to my point about the employment rates and underemployment rates to autistic adults, we use a profile or a CV very much as a starting point because they can be quite patchy.
Right.
Because what we find is that autistic adults, they may job hop, they may not have had great success in employment, full stop. And so what we do is really try and understand what that person could or should be doing. So we obviously look at the kind of at the academic background. We test for cognitive abilities. So things like attention to detail, pattern matching, error detection, periods of sustained concentration, and quite often with people that have that slant towards STEM-based subjects, they're often have above average cognitive abilities in those areas. And so by effectively testing for that and understanding what that person wants to do and could be doing, we start to get an understanding of the types of projects that we can actually put those consultants forward for, not just from a technology or a content perspective, but also in terms of the culture and the size of the team. Is the project business as usual? Is it an innovation project, or is it something that actually requires some innovation input and things like that, so that we can get the right character and right cultural fit as much as the technology fit as well, and the commercial fit. So that's really where we've grown up over the last 10 years. I guess the second part, going back to our social mission, is maybe a little bit broader, actually. And that really comes down to really creating awareness and education around neurodiversity and obviously autism being part of that.
Right.
And so, this really came about as a result of working with our clients over the last 10 years, because there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of misunderstanding, there's a lot of trepidation, a lot of anxiety in the workplace. And so from that perspective, Paul, I think we are very much unofficially in the fear and risk mitigation business, because there is a lot of fear of doing the wrong thing, saying the wrong thing. So it's actually easier to do nothing. It's probably fair to say that neurodiversity has played runner-up to that of gender and race in terms of the D&I space, but that's changing, which is great. But it's about creating that awareness and education around neurodiversity, such that we can help organisations on that path to neuroinclusion. And what I mean by that is that, as we've worked with our clients over years or months, whatever it happens to be in individual instances, quite often we're asked, can we help that organisation to recruit their own neurodiverse staff? And of course the answer is yes, but we take a different position and say, well, let's look at your internal culture to start with, because if you're an organisation of size, given that about 20% of the population has a neurodiverse condition, you're going to have some people within your organisation that are neurodiverse, or indeed autistic, or both, clearly. And so it's really about creating that culture so that people can feel comfortable to disclose, but equally it's about providing the tools for not only HR and D&I teams, but actually line managers to better support those individuals. So hence the awareness, the education starts. And really from a consulting point of view, yes, we provide a commercial advantage, because as you know, there is a global shortage of data analysts, data engineers, data scientists, cybersecurity analysts. So we're kind of tapping into that rich seam of gold. But we do a bit more than that, and that is to turn that kind of lived experience into a case study, to show that by working with Auticon, by having a consultant as part of the team, of which we pair each of our consultants with a job coach, who aren't technical, they're not project managers, they all have a background in clinical psychology. They really act as a bridge between the consultant and the client, and that really helps to embed that person in the project, and they will talk about minor accommodations, for example, again along with autism and some of the cognitive strengths. Maybe there is a flip side where again, generalizing, but people may need a little bit of extra processing time. They may be very, very honest in situations, and so an environment of interviews, for example, isn't the best place for that person to shine. They are a shop window, and typically questions are fired at individuals. Long periods of processing time aren't necessarily considered acceptable, and so all of those types of communication aspects are addressed, and we stand behind our consultants. So none of our consultants are interviewed by our clients, but it's about making sure that those minor accommodations, which could be things such as camera on, camera off in Teams or Zoom calls, for example, publishing an agenda for a call, not having things hit the diary within, or meetings within an hour, and things like that. But also a lot of autistic adults have hyper or hypo sensitivities to things like light or sound or touch. So in an office environment, we do a kind of an office or environmental assessment, just to kind of understand those sorts of things, so that each one individually is typically not a big deal. Put them all together, and actually address those, it makes a huge difference.
Right.
And actually what we say is that, yes, we're coming at this through the lens of neurodiversity, but these things apply to everyone. Who wouldn't want a tailored approach to an onboarding on a project, or when you're starting a new role in an organization? It's what we want to do is to make sure that everything is sort of tabled, i.e. that our consultant knows who they're going to be talking to on a daily basis and working with.
Yep.
They have a kind of a pseudo work buddy or mentor in the team. And this is just, someone that can answer quick fire questions of, where's the canteen, or how do I access XYZ tool, or whatever it may be.
Right.
And so by having that understanding, by having a timetable for the first 2 or 3 weeks of a project start, it just removes that anxiety and fear. And so we turn that lived experience into a case study where we can turn around to the organization and literally say, this is what we've done. This is how we've done it. It's not a big, scary thing. We'd absolutely love to provide you with more consultants, but we're ultimately more invested in trying to help that organization on that path to neuro inclusion, so that eventually they can be in a position to attract, recruit, retain, and develop their own neurodiverse staff. Being a social enterprise, we measure our social impact. We publish a social impact report every year, and it's really important to us that we can credibly measure the difference that we're making, not only in the workplace, but with the number of autistic adults that we employ, not just here with Autiscon in the UK, but across the nine other countries in which we operate currently across the globe.
Fantastic. I mean, there's some brilliant stories in there. I think there's a couple of things that really come to mind with me, and I've listened to the podcast as well, the In Conversation podcast, which is a fantastic one to check out as well for people who Autism in Conversation with Autiscon. Is that right?
It is indeed. Yeah. Thanks for the plug, Paul. Appreciate that.
all good. Big up the podcasters out there. But there's, in terms of bringing it back to this theme of helping people perform, I love the multi-layered element of this. So you're helping your consultants perform by making sure they're in an environment that isn't exclusive or excludes them because of things that affect them and affect their own performance. So you're providing a simple framework to help make sure that environment and that setup is right to help them perform. But you're also providing the sort of generic, typical consulting outcome, which is you're going to help the business perform by working on specific actionable projects and problems. But you also talk about the social enterprise element as well. So you're helping the business perform from its social aspect as well. So multiple layers of performance that you're really going at there.
Absolutely, and I think that there's maybe a slight addition to that as well, in the sense that teams that have or diverse teams that have different perspectives typically do perform better because of those different perspectives. And I think, certainly we've had examples where our consultants have gone in to a project and added immense value over and above, the commercial value of providing, data analyst or data science skills. This is about perspective and looking at things differently. I think, one of the common misconceptions of autism and the autism spectrum is that it is linear. And that would suggest that at one end, you've got someone that isn't very autistic, and at the other end, you've got someone who is very autistic. Yeah. It's not that at all. And, coming back to those cognitive strengths, we talk about things like spiky profiles, and language is constantly changing, but it's every autistic person is different. And so every autistic person has, different nuances, different, like we all do. I mean, you could argue that, everyone is neurodiverse to a greater or lesser extent in some ways. Yeah. But the important point here is that, a lot of organizations, they have their traditional recruitment methods. They look for a certain type of person, whether they're in financial services, whether in professional services or consulting. And arguably, if you look for a certain type of person, you're going to get the same type of results. And so one of the things that we advocate is to have that healthy mix of diversity within the team, because actually then the overall performance of the team goes up. Coming back to just some really basic examples that I sort of alluded to earlier, Paul, in the sense that, you know, when we do some of that initial onboarding and awareness training with the project team, you know, we sort of make a point to say, you know, if you're going to put a stand-up call or a project review call in the diary, could you just publish a very short agenda? But also, could you use clear and unambiguous communication when you're issuing instructions? And these are things, you know, if someone says, do the best you can and come back to me when you've had a look at it.
Yeah.
You know, these are things that, you know, we've all experienced in day-to-day language. But to someone with autism, it doesn't mean anything. Right. It's about being clear and unambiguous. But also it's about communicating some of the unwritten rules of the office. You know, coming back to the stand-up call, the project review call, is our consultant expected to, you know, to present, to question, to be in listen-only mode. And what we find is, just with those kind of little examples, of which obviously there are more, but the actual performance and the dynamics between the team actually improves as a result of just putting in place some of these very basic things, which is great to see before you even talk about different perspectives, different backgrounds, different ideas, different, you know, technical and academic backgrounds. It's really fascinating to see.
Yeah. Oh, and one of the points that always comes across on the podcast and in this conversation that we've just had as well is that this is just generally good practice stuff, isn't it? Who wouldn't want that level of clarity? But what I take from it is, by having that level of clarity and that level of individual focus on what's going to help you perform and what's going to hinder your performance, you're always going to get the best out of people, and you're going to get people in that you wouldn't necessarily have got in before, because you're opening up your mindset, you're opening up your business to a much more diverse group of people who can provide immense value to your business and mix the whole thing up. So it's fantastic.
Absolutely. I mean, I would at this point quote our UK CEO, who is a fantastic human being. Don't tell him I said that, but I mean, one of his phrases, which I love actually, and I do plagiarize it, but credit him at the same time, but is, you know, everyone wants to be accepted for who they are and appreciated for the work that they do. And I think that's something which subliminally is kind of baked into our ethos. Yeah. And that really comes across when we're trying to work with organizations that do, or maybe are on that beginning of the journey and do have some of that natural fear and kind of trepidation by embarking on this journey.
Yeah. And don't worry, Steve, it won't go beyond these four walls.
Fantastic. Thank
you. So we mentioned earlier on Jenny Many. So what's Jenny Many all about? Tell us a bit about that.
So what is really interesting to me, Paul, is that, you know, sometimes you kind of get out the gate, you've got your kind of mental career path in mind, and then, you know, things come along which completely put you off your intended course, but actually provide opportunities along the way as well. And so for me, you know, my youngest son was diagnosed as dyslexic. He's a bit older now and just heading into his second year of A-levels, but when he was first diagnosed, obviously we got him some help with that, but it was more the I guess the psychological aspects of not feeling able to be to be able to read in front of his class, and being, I guess, not necessarily ostracized is not the right term, but very self-conscious in terms of his peer group. And so, you know, one of the things I tried to do was to remove that fear of reading and look for another way for him to still get enjoyment from stories and to consume stories without necessarily, you know, forcing him to sit down and read. And one of the things that we literally did for, you know, a bit of fun was to, you know, come up with some story ideas with characters being based on family members and things like that, which just sort of, it was related to obviously the kind of core issue, but it was coming at it from a very different angle. And so, things improved. He got older, and the original concept for me didn't go away, because I thought, actually, if we did this in our own very modest way within our kind of own four walls and our household, then maybe there's something here to actually expand upon. So my sort of part-time hobby, if you like, over the last few years has really been to create a more robust character set. We're now, fast forward a few years into the future, we were in a position where we've got 23,000 words or thereabouts full stories, narrated by Gemma Whelan, who's a UK actress. She was Yara Greyjoy in Game of Thrones, and she's been in The Crown and other things as well. And we've kind of really developed a character set based on peer groups, friendships, communication, and some of the kind of good, hearty stuff. We're not about demonizing technology or anything like it. It's kind of using technology for good. It's a window to the world, and fantastic. But what we wanted to try and do was to really put some soft learning objectives and to tackle some of the things that, from the dyslexic example, kids face when they're going through, those kind of formative years at school, whether it's falling out with friends or cybersecurity. We tackle various subjects, but sensitively and hopefully elegantly in stories.
Mm.
But it's also about helping kids to find their authentic ambition, and to be able to do that, it starts with the parents, arguably. So the Jenny Many stories aren't just for the kids. The actual proposition is aimed at parents and caregivers and grandparents, extended family members, to say, well, hold on a second. Is success at school predicated on exam success? Because, neurodiverse individuals or people with dyslexia or dyscalculia or whatever, maybe exams aren't a good reflection of that person's skill or ability, because it's a one-dimensional way of testing someone's ability to recall information, which maybe isn't the best. And so you take that to the next kind of logical point, which says, well, is financial success the only measure of an individual's success in life? And I think bottom line is probably not. I mean, it's far more important for me, certainly as a parent, that my children end up doing something that they are happy doing, that stimulates them, that gives them that kind of purpose, as opposed to keeping score with how much money they make on an annual basis. And so the proposition really is about trying to shift the dynamic a little bit. And also, I've got two boys. They kind of went through the PlayStation, Xbox kind of phase of being in their bedrooms, socializing, over the airwaves, playing games and stuff like that. And so, again, we're not demonizing that, but it's about trying to also encourage kids to get out there and try stuff. And by virtue of that, encourage their parents to try and encourage their kids to get out there and try stuff. Life is a bit of a tasting menu, particularly at that age, where how do you know if you could be the next ballet dancer or graffiti artist or whatever the example is, and unless you've had the opportunity to try it. Now, obviously, there are some barriers to that potentially in some aspects, financially or whatever, but it's the principle of just trying to shape and change that attitude, really, from a parental perspective.
Oh, love it. And I've checked out the website. I think it's fantastic. And as my daughter in particular grows up, I'm going to be going through that a lot, I believe, over the next couple of years. So really looking forward to following her journey through the Jenny Many universe, should we say, because it is expanding quite rapidly as well, isn't it? And growing from not only the books, but the website and the games and all the other things that are associated with it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, with this, the project was never designed to or never focused on, selling, hundreds or thousands or whatever number of copies of audiobooks. And actually, we've just released a series of short stories which are available on the website for free download, because we want to provide value and be authentic in the message, and that means just trying to give as much as we can. to people for free and provide that value as well. So.
Oh, fantastic. Some really good stuff there. And love the just written down on my pad here about fear mitigation. I think Auticon and the Jenny Many story for me is about mitigating people's fears, both from a business perspective as to what the risks or perceived risks might be around having more neurodiversity in the business. It's about mitigating those consultants' fears in terms of that might be preventing them from going into the work environment that they are at the moment. And much with the Jenny Many stories about making sure that those internal fears almost are mitigated from what's out there, what can be done, how can you think about things differently. So real common theme that I just wrote down there. I couldn't help but make some notes for myself. So just next sort of section of the podcast then, your performance. So how do you up your game? Who do you go to? Where do you go when you want help with your own performance?
And it's a really great question, Paul. I mean, aside from the kind of standard answer of friends and family, I think for me it's always about keeping the good stuff coming in, and I like to think that I'm overall a half glass full type of person, but everyone has good days and bad days and things like that. So for me it's looking and really obtaining clues from people that are successful or highly motivated or inspirational. And so for me, podcasts, when riding my bike or driving the car and stuff like that, listening to various kind of people, so people like Tim Ferriss or Tony Robbins or Gary Vaynerchuk, each with maybe a slightly different angle or stance on things. But for me, it is literally as basic as trying to keep the good stuff coming in, because it can. There's always value. There's never a magic silver bullet to being on your A game as much as you can be, but it's just about trying to absorb the clues of what successful people are doing and taking some of that as by way of inspiration.
Fantastic. A great lesson for any of us really is you don't have to be, you can learn from those big names and those people who are known for being inspirational out there, but you can take that inspiration from anyone at any time, can't you, in terms of what can help you up your game just by being a bit different, by looking at what's working for other people and thinking, how could I adapt that to my own game?
Exactly. And I think for me it's always about trying to consistently keep learning as well. No one's got it down. We're here for, without getting too philosophical, but we're only here for a very short period of time. Let's try and make the best of everything and every day, and focus on keeping or trying to be better tomorrow as we were yesterday.
Fantastic, love it. So a couple of quick fire questions as we close things out. So one thing I like to ask people is, if you could be helping anybody perform with your skill set, with your company or your endeavors that you're doing, that you're currently not helping, for instance, who would that be and why?
So again, it's a great question. I think ultimately, with my Auticon hat on, it would be public sector. It would be government departments, and I think the reason for that is that there is a great shift and a great acknowledgement by government departments for neurodiversity, but I think that there's an element of being able to accelerate some of that and actually be putting into practice some of the things that are being preached, and so for me that's a great area, because obviously government employ a heck of a lot of people. There is a massive digital transformation happening in multiple areas within government, as you would expect, all the time. And so for us, it really helps to embed that, not only taking government policy and sort of reinforcing that in terms of practicalities, but it really helps that kind of long-term cultural shift. And actually, when you think about the disparity in terms of number of people being full-time employed with autism, if you think about the scale and depth and breadth of government departments, it's well outside of IT. Our aspiration as a business is to ultimately not just keep in our lane within the IT sector, But if you think about Department for the Environment, there's so many different departments that could maybe open their doors to having neurodiverse employees. And I think, we'd love to be part of that journey in our own sort of modest way.
Fantastic. Love it. And flipping that on its head, if you were able to sit down, have a coffee, have a one-to-one chat with an individual or group of individuals that you think could really inspire you to help your own performance, who might that be?
So there's a couple of answers to this, and the first one, without sounding, really cheesy, for want of a better word, but it's our consultants. Whenever I have the opportunity to go in the office and speak to them, and they're just amazing people, and actually, some of their personal stories and backstories are very humbling. And so I think, from a very specific day-to-day aspect, having that is such a motivator. It's so inspirational to keep doing what we're doing, and the reasons that we're obviously doing it. I think from a more or a wider perspective, it would come back to folks that maybe I've mentioned, and imagine sitting down with Tony Robbins, Gary Vaynerchuk, and Tim Ferriss, and some of these guys who are amazingly inspirational in their own fields, and just having the ability to sort of pluck information as to what makes them successful, what are the things that they've done, what are the things they've tried, and actually hear about their failures as well, which ultimately has led to the successes. And something that we don't necessarily talk about enough is how good failure is in terms of the stepping stone to actually the successful outcome that you were hopefully intending in the first place.
Yeah, if you want to perform, you have to try, and try leads to failure, doesn't it? So being able to go through that failure and learn from it, and keep that resilience in place has always been a key interest of mine as well. So
absolutely.
Well, just before we wrap things up then, how do people find out more? So we've got Auticon, we've got Jenny Many, we've got you as an individual. How do we find out more? Where do we go to?
So auticon.co.uk is a great starting point in terms of our website. My email address is steve.hill@auticon.co.uk. Obviously, I'm on LinkedIn. There isn't too many Steve Hills on LinkedIn, so hopefully I should be easily findable. But also from a Jenny Many perspective, it's the website's jennymany.com. So lots of games, free stories to download, and hopefully some inspiration in there as well.
Fantastic. So, and just for clarity, that's JENNYMNMANY.com.
It is indeed.
I'll put all the links in the notes, etc., as we go through with the releasing the podcast as well. So, Steve, as always, an absolute pleasure to chat. I think on the theme of helping people perform, I can't think of a more sort of noble and multi-layered cause that's going on there. So wherever I go at the moment, and if I'm seeing the opportunities to either point people in the direction of Auticon, point people in the direction of Jenny Many, or just to spread the word in terms of the podcast that's out there, and the value that's out for everybody really to up their performance through having a better mindset, more open mindset towards neurodiversity, and embracing individuals for what they can bring. I think if we can get that story out there, then that's going to be a fantastic thing.
That's very kind of you, Paul. And thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Fantastic, Steve. Thanks very much. We'll see you again.
Bye for now.
Cheers. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, then please give the podcast a rate, review, and share. I'm Paul Teasdale, and from sausage making to banking, oil and gas to Formula One, I help people perform. If you'd like to find out more and have a conversation, contact me via helpingpeopleperform.com.